Okay, so welcome to the best practices for managing and governing external partner access. My name is Arvind Suthar. I am a program manager in our customer experience get to production team for the identity engineering team. And I think Mark will be carrying off the first part of the presentation. So,
thanks. Whoa, watch out. Yeah, so hi, I'm Mark Wahl. So I'm also a program manager from the Azure Active Directory engineering team. I work on identity management, identity governance. Some of you may have seen me somehow associated with provisioning protocols. Don't know why, but I like doing that stuff too. But what I'm going to be talking about today with Arvind's help is what we've seen and learned from customers around B2B, working with your outside partners, suppliers, vendors, consultants, contractors, all the cases where it's not your employees, but it's another organization. Now we'll have some points during this where we can have this be interactive. We want to get your feedback, get your take on it, so we know what material is going to be most relevant for you and for your organizations. But first, let's start with some basic groundwork, stuff you should probably already know. A lot of what we've been seeing as a drive for B2B and partner collaboration is all about this theme of digital transformation. How do we make sure that we have the right information, resources, knowledge available to all the people that need to have access to it, that we have all the right tools, that we have all the right devices, network components, all the things relevant joined together. And of course, if you've seen any of our talks from Alex Simons or even some of the other keynotes, the new mantra is identity is the control plane. We've had lots of different ways to think about controls in the past. Oh, we're going to firewall this. Oh, we're going to have a network perimeter. We're going to have a VPN. And now the way that we need to think about this is identity. How can we use identity in order to control access to all these different resources? What are the benefits we get? And then what are also the considerations that you need to think about when identity is now your control plane? Now, the good news, let's start with some good news, is collaboration is far easier than it ever has been. Having multiple people, multiple organizations coming together, working on the same Word document, or in our case, same slide deck, is, I would say, trivially easy in SaaS applications. And I have just looked back over maybe 10, 15 years ago when it was, if we want to work together, we have to set up ADFS and exchange some metadata and WS Federation. Whoever got that working, did anyone ever get like ADFS across the orgs working? Like there's like 3 people got it working? Only in the lab, yes. So it was terrible. Whereas now it's like, if you go to any SaaS application, probably the first thing it's going to ask you is, invite your friends, bring in your coworkers. It's easy. Everyone come together and we can work on whatever it is the application does. Collaboration is the new normal for SaaS apps. The other thing that we hear in a lot of organizations is collaboration just happens spontaneously. And so for many organizations, it's not a case of, is collaboration going to happen, but how is collaboration happening? People do this all the time. Ever since email got started and the notion of there was an attachment button, people just email files around. That still happens. Maybe not as much as it used to, but it's still the normal. If I can't get anything else to work, I'll just email you the deck. Or even worse, they'll say, hey, I found out about this new free file sharing site. If I just put all my content on the site, I can share it with anyone, and it's free. Wow, that must be a really easy way to collaborate. Who knows what's going on in that site? So we have to assume, if we're working in any, I would say, modern organization, that there is some collaboration going on. And the question is, what do you want to do about that collaboration? How do you think about the way collaboration is happening in your organization for your employees or your students or your faculty, whatever it is, and all the different organizations out there that they're working with? The first and most basic question is, can you even see it's happening? With email, it was, well, we're going to put a DLP rule on our outgoing email server so that we can then block attachments or limit what kind of attachments can go through. But nowadays, you just wouldn't even know that there's file sharing going on. Someone has a phone, and that phone has an app for some file upload-download site. The traffic is invisible to any of your network controls. It's using the phone system. So if you can't see it, can you even control it? Do you have the ability to do something in order to block or limit that? But I think the more fundamental question is, should you control it? Oftentimes, I find as a technology person, we try to look for the technology answer. Oh, this looks like a problem we need to go solve. How do we change the protocol? How do we change the bits on the wire? How do we block the traffic at the TCP/IP level in order to enforce a technical control? But one thing that we've learned when we talk to customers is maybe there's other ways to think about the problem of controls. What makes sense for B2B? The main challenge that we see when we look at the B2B problem for modern applications, collaborative applications, things like Office or Google or Slack or all these new things, is there's just going to be all these additional identities that are likely working with your resources. They're not under your control, they're not under any centralized control, and they're not under any consistent control. So you might be working with one organization, it's like they've got great identity management policies. They're using all the latest technologies and standards. They've got everything locked down in their network. They're doing great. But then at the same time, you're working with some other organization. It's like, yeah, they're just now getting started. They don't know what they're doing. And their approach to identity management might be night and day different. Oh yeah, we'll get rid of those employee accounts eventually, but we'll just stop paying people and then they stop showing up. We don't need to lock them out, do we? That's not their way of thinking about it. So with this, when we have all these different inconsistent ways that users are coming in, interacting with apps, we need to think about identity and access differently. If we try to say, well, let's just go and do all the management within the applications itself, it becomes too hard to understand from a compliance, from a visibility perspective. I have to go around and inventory every app. Okay, Slack, what have you got in Slack? Okay, now let's look at Teams. Now let's look at Salesforce. Now let's look at Box. It becomes problematic. But if you try to centralize everything, let's have everything route through IT. If I want to send this guy a file, I have to go get IT's permission for it. People just bypass IT. It's really not what we find a technology question. It's more of a culture question. And that's the biggest learning that we've gotten when we've talked to organizations is the first step is understanding what is the organization trying to do and how do they think about the relative prioritizations for partner access. Now for today, we've kind of split it into two axes. One is how much is your organization focused on the needs of central IT or central GRC, centralized terms versus the whole user community, all the people you're working with. And the other axis is where is your focus? Are you focused on the needs of your organization primarily? We don't care, partners, they're a nuisance, but what we really need to do is manage our employees versus we want to make sure our partners get a great experience, our suppliers, our vendors, our dealers have a great experience working with our resources. So for that, we've then broken this into 4 different ways in which we see people approaching B2B, and we've learned some best practices for each one. We're going to talk through that. The first one is the notion of orchestration. You want to ensure that your partners working with your end users are going to have a great experience. How do you make it easy for partners to come in, get access, get what they need? You have a great way of thinking about it. Another way that we'll be talking about is you may not want to necessarily focus on orchestration of the partners. You may not even have visibility of partners, but you want to empower your end users to say, whatever collaborations you need to set up, whatever partners you need to work with, you can make that happen. We also see customers whose primary focus is more on how do I make sure that I segment and isolate the partners. We'll talk about some of the challenges there. And then also one of my favorite kind of organizations that look at what are the challenges when I'm really focused on the governance implications of this. Everyone loves this slide. Take you a picture of it. I'll put a little star on this. You can Instagram this slide. Okay, great. Okay, so let's go through the first scenario, orchestration. So what do we mean by orchestration? It means the primary goal is empower partners to work with your organization. Make it very easy for them to say, each time I want to work with a new partner, one of these new circles down here, it's kind of a cookie cutter approach. Oh, I've got 15 dealers today. I want to have another 20 dealers next fiscal year. Great, let's make that happen. Hey, I've got 1,000 suppliers. Let's have 2,000 suppliers. How do we make that collaboration process easier? What does it mean for identity and access? Now, first, let's talk about some of the things that we've been doing within Microsoft and some of the technologies that we've been doing, because it does have Microsoft in our slide, so I'm going to talk a little technology, but indulge me for a minute. I'll get back to best practices in a second. So one thing that we've been doing with some of our customers is this new notion of what we call entitlement management. What is entitlement management? It's really intended to help set up these kind of cookie cutter, easy to manage collaborations with a subset of your organization's resources. So let's say Contoso, it's on the left. They are the organization that has the resources. They got lots of things, some groups, some apps, some SharePoint sites, all the different things that are managed by IT, or at least IT is aware of that. And some of those things make sense for collaboration. I want to allow outside sales reps to come in and get at sales information. Hey, they can see our latest brochures and material and so on. They can exchange data about leads, whatever those applications need. There's some people that are outside your organization that need to work with sales. There's probably another set of people that need to work with marketing, and perhaps a different set that need to work with finance. Each one of these groups, marketing, sales, finance, within your organization, probably thinks about their partners. If you went and talked to the head of sales, they'd say, yeah, here are all our outside sales reps, the firms we work with. You want to talk with marketing, they'd give a different list. Well, here are the outside marketing firms that are doing our brochures and our press releases, and finance would have a different set. They all need to collaborate, but typically they need to collaborate with different sets of resources, different kinds of access, and different partners. Now, as an IT person, many of the people who I talk to who are setting up identity and access there is no one thing that IT can do that would satisfy everyone. I just can't say, well, if I just publish a website, will that be sufficient? No, because each team, marketing, sales, finance, et cetera, has different needs for collaboration. So instead, I want to enable the sales team to set up what are the cookie cutter patterns that make sense for them. So for them, it would be outside sales reps. So Lidware are some of the outside sales reps for Contoso. Their employees can come in, request access, get access to Contoso's resources. Now, you're like, okay, Mark, that was some weird stuff you're talking about products, but what does that really mean? How do I understand how that works in a real organization? So we have a case study we put up on our website, published about a month and a half ago with Avanade. Now, some Avanade people are here. Is anyone from Avanade in the room today? Yay. Wave, up again. Okay, so Avanade has been one organization we've been working with, and we've been learning a lot just in terms of how they've been approaching B2B and partner collaboration. They've had a lot of needs to work with their partners, all the organizations they do business with, be able to exchange files, exchange content securely with them. And they've tried lots of things in the past. I think they set up a separate Azure AD tenant for that. They had file sharing applications, but they really wanted to get visibility over what kind of sharing was going on. Now, one thing that I learned just reading this case study with them that I thought was really important was, from an IT perspective, the best thing you can do is make your end users happy. Now, that's like, it should be a no-brainer, right? But in the case of B2B and partner collaboration, that's important because if your customers like the kinds of tools that you're giving for collaboration, they're more likely to use them as opposed to some other tools. And so it's a question of the end user friction. If you say, look, in order to do collaboration, you have to fill out these 15-page forms to get it signed in triplicate and go through and get a VP approval, it's like, well, I'll just send you the file. Like, I don't want to go through that. But we say, here's how you can easily onboard your next set of partners. You got 5 dealers you're working with, you want another 5 dealers? Yeah, it's easy. Here's how you go and manage that yourselves. IT can step out of the picture of deciding access. That then drives the end users to interacting with these tools in a way that then you have visibility. So definitely take a look at this case study. There's a little video in there, just a write-up of what they're doing, and it gets dark. Okay, that was not deliberate. I don't know why that happened. Thank you. Okay, so case study, definitely take a look at that. Now, what are some of the best practices we've seen for organizations that are doing this kind of orchestration? The first thing is get out of the business of managing your partners' identities. In the old days, we all had to do this. We all had to go and create accounts on behalf of our partners because, well, partners didn't have their own identity, or they had a directory that was siloed off or behind some firewall we couldn't get at. That world is no more. When I talk to some of our customers and they say, do you manage your identities for your partners? They say, yes, it's a big drain. You don't want to be in that cost of your partner's employees calling your help desk up saying, I forgot my password, I want to change my name. Like, get out of that business. Move it all to the partners. These days, there's so many options. You can use Azure AD, you can use social identities, you can use Gmail. There's so many ways people can get identities for their organization. You shouldn't have to have the identities of your partners. Let them bring their identities to your resources. The second thing that we saw is really important is standardizing the onboarding process. Make sure that you can say, okay, for sales, we realize you want to bring in a bunch of outside sales reps. Great. How do we go through an approval process once or a decision process once? Get the reviews, get everything very much standardized so that the next partner comes in, it's automatic. You don't have to go through a lot of, well, should we do a SAML exchange here? Or don't get involved in those kinds of things on a per partner basis. Try to make it as common as possible. And make sure IT isn't in the process or stuck in a step of deciding who should have access. It's not really IT's job for most of our customers, and you probably don't have the context. Should I work with your firm? IT probably doesn't know whether it should happen. Someone in the business does. How can you delegate that decision to the business? And so with that, you need to make it very easy then with these standard, cookie cutter access. Hey, salespeople, this is what you give to your outside sales rep. Marketing, you're working with an outside marketing design firm, here's how they get access. Make it easy then for them to share, to collaborate. Users can come in, get the access they need, and then get out again. Key thing here that we learned, working with Avinod, working with many other customers, is end user education. You build the great tools, but you never tell the end users, well, of course, no one will use them. So it's about the end user education. How, because this, as an IT person, do you provide value to your end users to say, if you use this collaboration, it's easier, it's faster, it meets all the customer or all of your company's guidelines if you do it this way. How do you make sure you get that message out there so that people know that IT is there and encouraging and supporting collaboration? IT is not just the big no. So second scenario, segmentation. You're working with different business partners, but your biggest concern is they can't see the other partners. So if you're working with Coke and Pepsi, it's like, I don't want the Coke people to know I'm working with Pepsi. I don't want the Pepsi people to know I'm working with Coke. Does anyone have this challenge today? 1, 2, yeah, so a few people have this. So we've seen this in a couple of organizations. Predominantly, it's in cases which you might expect, financial services. In a lot of financial services, if you're working with business customers, you obviously have to isolate them. You can't say, I'll just see what other kind of customers this bank or this insurance company has. That would be embarrassing if your end users of your partners were able to do this. So you need to isolate them, make sure they can't see other people's resources, can't see other people or other organizations' users. So here's one case study. We've worked with a financial services company, and their approach for doing this is to SharePoint Online with site collections. And the notion here that they came up with is setting up site collections per different business customer that they're working with. The notion here is you need to then have a well-defined boundary. For them, using SharePoint Online, it's a site collection. That's the boundary to say, the users from one of their customers go into a site collection and they never go anywhere else. That is the only place where the collaboration can happen. The reason for that is if isolation is your goal, you need to make sure you have strict visibility on what those users are accessing and also controls on what they could access. They can't bring users into groups, so they're really limited into what they have access to because you don't want two people like, hey, I'm in a group with someone from Pepsi. That's odd, interesting. So site collections for this customer was how they went and scoped their ability to address their needs for segmentation. Now, some lessons learned working with this. The first is, should you then say, oh, well, if we're doing all this heavy lifting, we have to still manage partner identities? No. Again, just like in our previous example, enable the partners to bring their own identities. Again, most organizations now have some kind of cloud presence or can get cloud identities pretty easily from Microsoft or a host of other people at this event. And so it's a low enough barrier to then say, I want to put that problem onto the customer themselves. If I'm working with, let's say, Coke and Pepsi, someone in Coke can manage which Coke employees get access. I don't want to have to go deal with that. And some Pepsi employee can manage which Pepsi employees get access. But the key thing here, from an IT perspective, is then managing the resources. So once you've said, okay, this is how the partner is going to manage your identity, it's the resource question. You really need to look at the authorization controls in whatever applications these users are getting access to. So if you're saying, yeah, I'm just going to take some sites that I've got already on premises, lift them up, put them in SharePoint Online, start sharing them out, you have to spend the time to go and look for, well, do I have things like all authenticated users? All authenticated users as an authorization statement won't work in this model. It doesn't fit into an environment where you could have a need for isolation and two users from different companies inadvertently seeing the same content. So there's a big effort that you need to look at here to make sure that you know how resources come into the scope and how partners come in. One of the things that we've seen from organizations that have that need for segmentation is the onboarding processes for partners is a mandatory process. I just can't say, yeah, I think I'll work with your company today and start sharing some content. No, because again, we need to make sure if isolation from two customers is critically important, that any work with an outside firm has to go through a well-defined process. You set up a collaboration environment with them, you bring the users in, put them in that environment, make sure they stay there. Now, obviously, this requires a pretty high degree of discipline. And so what we've seen is organizations like our financial services we talked about earlier, really in this are starting with a single scenario, a single application, whether it's SharePoint Online or a homegrown application or an application they've purchased in for collaboration. That's really where we see most organizations get to if they take segmentation as their focus. But what we then see, though, is organizations for whom their biggest worry with B2B, with partner collaboration, is how do I make sure that all my governance goals for identity governance, for access, be able to respond to compliance questionnaires are still met? Who has this concern in their organization? You? Yep. So more for this than for segmentation. Although I saw you raise your hand twice. That's okay. Oh, you got your hand too? Good. Okay. So here we see organizations who have been, in many cases, struggling for years to be able to deal with the kinds of questions auditors ask. Who has access? How did they get access to resources? Who approved that? Why do they still have access after they've changed roles? All these typical auditor questions. Okay, great. We finally put into place technologies. We've got products, we've got everything deployed. Everything's working for our employees, so we can finally satisfy that auditor inquiry and get that finding cleared off the list, and I can stop talking to the board. And then a SaaS application shows up, and then partners start showing up, and then the auditors find out about it. Oh, say the auditors, that's interesting. There's some data up there in that SaaS app that's relevant to our area of audit compliance. And look, there's a partner user who has access to that. I wonder, how do we answer those questions? How did that partner user get access? Why do they still have access? Who is approving this? So, how do you go and address the needs for governance of identities and access when you have partners coming in? So looking at some best practices, some of the customers have been doing this. One thing we saw people doing early on was taking a kind of a big hammer approach. If I see a user in my directory, in my applications, that's an external user, and I don't know why they're there, I'll just block them. Just block them, take them out, don't let them sign in anymore, just like wipe them out. Well, obviously that helps with your compliance. Look, they can't get access anymore. But the end user perspective is horrible. Yes. It's horrible from the partner perspective. I was working, I had access, and today I don't. Something went wrong. I'll call IT. And IT is like, what's going on? And of course, for the people in your business who are working with that partner, your access suddenly goes away. People are confused. They don't understand. Why did I lose access? Did my password expire? They spend all this time and effort. When it really comes down to, is it really the user that's the problem? And what I think, in talking to some of these customers, is maybe that approach of just saying, well, let's just block the user. I don't like them. Strange, odd kind of collaborations are going on here. And saying, let's focus on the access. What access does that person have? And how can we control the access? Let's assume that there'll be users in my directory, in my applications, coming in. My end user is going to invite, the business has a need for that. And rather than just saying, oh, I saw someone in there and I'll just block them because they're like a lost person wandering around the building, instead, let's understand what is the risk and how do I contain that risk. The first step is understand what could someone do. Let's say you have a user in the directory. Doesn't matter if they're a business partner or an employee or a contractor. Let's start with the basics. What do they have access to? Now, if you're thinking about this from a GRC perspective, you've probably already have controls in place today around your employees in order to limit what they can get access to. Information protection. You probably have some policies, and if not, you may want to consider them, to say things like the only people who can access the financial documents are people in finance or who have been approved, like some subset. You just can't walk up to a SharePoint site and say, yeah, oh look, a financial document, and great, all authenticated users can access. Wonderful. Of course not. You have controls already in place for limiting employee access. Are those controls also appropriate for the partners? Hopefully for most of your business sensitive content, you've already locked down which employees can get access, so that automatically gives you then limitations for which partner users can access. Going beyond that, conditional access policies. This is one thing that we've seen organizations start to do and say, how can we look at the different kind of applications we've got in our environment? Maybe we have some applications that are all about collaboration. SharePoint and Teams and OneDrive and so on from Microsoft or Slack or Salesforce. And then we have applications that really aren't intended for collaboration. The first step you can say is, well, what could a random unvetted user get access to? Well, perhaps we should start with not allowing people that are external users from being able to get at those applications that are not intended for collaboration, just so you can start scoping down your threat boundary of, well, what if someone starts exploring and seeing what they can get? The second step then is to see, well, what do they actually access? Yes, there's probably lots of resources that a user could access, but that's the same for an employee as well as for an external user. I could access lots of things at Microsoft, but most of the time I don't. So should the focus for my IT be, well, what could Mark see versus what is Mark seeing? So where we see a lot of our customers now looking at is understanding the access of an external user. What sites, what teams, what applications are they working with, and then find out who's responsible for that. Did someone approve that? Did someone know about that? In a lot of cases, there is, it just wasn't written down. Oh, we brought this user in, we just forgot to tell anyone, but there's a legitimate business purpose for that. So, the approach that we see organizations now doing is collect the justification after the fact. Yes, I know I should have told my compliance officer that I was working with Arvind here. I forgot. But anyway, now that you've caught me, I'm working with Arvind on this document. We have to share access. Here's the reason. We're going to be doing it for the next 2 months until the conference is done. Okay, great. Thanks. You're approved. So coming back to Microsoft technology for a moment, access reviews, access recertification, we see as a great tool. Lots of organizations, of course, have been doing recertification campaigns for what's now decades for employees for access. And this is one that we think for partner collaboration is something probably a lot of people are already familiar with. So one thing we've been doing on the Azure AD side is allowing you to pick. When I'm reviewing, let's say, members of the group, do I want to review everyone, all the members, or just the guests? Just the guest we see as a valuable choice here because you might already have processes that are reviewing and understanding how do employees get access. Maybe you've got some tools that are automatically giving employees the right access based on their role and things. So it's like, that's already taken care of. Or when an employee leaves, HR tells us about it and we turn off their account. So those are under control. But these guests, if there are guests getting in the group, that's the new risk. That's the new area we're concerned about. So I just want to have reviews of guests in my group, guests in my sites, guest access to the application, these external users who've been brought in, and look at their access and just theirs. Because those are an area that then you can then collect from a group owner, an application owner, a site owner, someone responsible for the resource, responsible for the application, then saying, yes, I see that Arvind is a business partner. He has access to this resource. Here's my justification for it. I record that information. It's all audited. Maybe every 6 months, every year, I go back in and re-ask, does Arvind still need access? Yes, I can say, yes, I'm working with him on a new project. Here's the justification. So that then, when compliance comes and talks to IT and says, why does Arvind have access? I can say, look, here's the justification. It was approved by this person in the business, the resource owner on this date, got reapproved like 6 months later. Here's the audit trail for why that person has access. So then the auditor is deflected, goes talks to them, stops talking to IT, which I think is mostly what we want to do, is get auditors talking to the right people. So best practices, if your concern is governance. The first step is you probably have data management controls. Who has DLP today in your organization? Not as many hands. So who has DLP in your organization but doesn't know about it? Yes. Okay. Yeah, you probably already have something going on, and perhaps as an identity person, whenever there's DLP, it's like, yeah, I'll not worry about that. That's someone else's problem. But there's lots of tools already going on. There's content scanning tools. There's lots of technology options out there already for information protection that can really help, because what they can do is they can say, let's just find whole swaths of information, whole swaths of content that are sensitive, and wall those off so that external users don't get access. So that all those things are, it's like, oh, I don't know if I got some file shares or some SharePoint sites that have all authenticated users with access. That's okay. I can use some information protection tools. I can use DLP to then say, even if the guest happens to get to the site, to the file share, to wherever that content is, the content itself is protected so they don't get access. The second best practice that we've heard, understand who the sponsors are and under what framework, legal, compliance, regulatory, et cetera, you're collaborating with an outside firm. This is absolutely critical, because if you don't have that framework, then it's not clear what kinds of access should be allowed. If you're sharing information about health records or your customers' data with an outside sales rep, it's like, well, you're sending data, and is that PII? Like, all sorts of interesting audit alarm bells go off. So the first step is to say, under what terms are we working with this outside sales rep? We have a contract in place, right? We have an NDA in place, right? All these things should be written down someplace. Legal should have all of these contracts in place before the collaboration happens. So how do you make reference to them? How do you say, oh, I understand these users from this outside sales firm, they're working with us, but under this legal context. I can point to that so that then when the auditors ask, hey, looks like there's some PII escaping to the web, am I going to write you up? No, you don't write us up. This contract is governing it. So you have all that written down. The challenge, of course, is for a lot of large organizations, there may not be any one sponsor for all access. I might be working with that person over there to plan to acquire their company. You might be working with that same person because you're going to invite them to a birthday party. I don't know about your project, you don't know about my project, and that's as it should be. But we both have a need for the user to come in. So this is where it's going to get a little bit complicated from an IT perspective. But you need to make sure that there's a process in place when I give that person access. Yes, here, you can see our planning acquisition document, and you can share with them, yes, here's where the birthday party is going to be. Then each of us is saying, yes, there's a need for access from that person, from their organization to my content. I'm signing off on that. So that then, from an IT perspective, it's all written down. Who gave them access and why, so that there's no question about it later on. And you also know then, if there's any concern, hey, this person's acting strangely, they're trying to request stuff, or we're not sure if they still need access to the directory, you know who to turn to. You don't need to just say, oh, I'll just take them out of the directory and break stuff. Now, with anything new, there'll probably be a learning period for you and a learning period for your audit, whether it's an internal audit or an external audit team, to understand and recognize the need for collaboration here. Hopefully, most of you who have a need to work with an outside audit firm have already started that conversation with them. But if not, this is an area that we think is, again, critical for success. Auditors hate surprises. I used to be a CISA myself, and I hated being surprised by things. So the most important thing is to not try to hide it from them. Don't say, oh, well, they'll never find it in the cloud. So yes. So just give them time, make sure they understand, here's the new way we're going to think about partner collaboration. They may not be happy with it. They may say, well, what I really want is an Excel spreadsheet. That no, the old techniques may not work, but at least there's an understanding that this is how the business operates, and there's a framework in place. Now, I've been talking a lot for a while, so I'm going to hand it over to Arvind. He's going to talk for a bit about empowering the end user.
Thanks, Mark. So the model that Mark just talked about, this governing model, the focus is on let's prevent access, let's make sure that all access is controlled. He introduced this model of vetting. We're going to vet this user. Every user that comes through is going to get vetted and justified. What we're talking about here with empowering, the focus is more on let's establish high-level guardrails. Let's establish what is normal. What's our baseline of collaboration, and fit different populations of users into these different categories. And so the idea is to make it more efficient for the admin, a small team of admins governing hundreds of thousands of users. It may be a heavyweight process to say, we are going to vet every single user. We may have 1 million external users that are coming in to collaborate. Every single one of those 1 million are going to get evaluated. And by the way, we have a backlog because we have 1 million that are already in that we need to deal with. And so this empowering model is the model that Microsoft takes within our own organization. And it is kind of based on pushing decisions out and grouping controls and collaboration at a higher level. So, the first question here, can you enable secure end user driven partner collaboration? A lot of companies hear that and they say, we can never do that. We can never delegate out to our end users decisions about who to collaborate with. Then the next question that I ask is, are you staffed to approve every one of these accesses that come through? And the answer inevitably is no, we don't have the staff to do our own jobs, much less approving millions of external sharing requests. And then there's a question of addressing existing access. So what Microsoft has done has been to focus on end user empowerment, end user collaboration, and do it in as secure a way as possible with the constructs that we have across our tool set. And this isn't just B2B, lifecycle management, partner managed identities, partner single sign-on is all really good, really important, but far from being enough when it comes to governance and really getting a handle on where your data is. So the idea is to make it easy for the end users and make it easy for the admins. If it's very difficult for an end user to comply, they're not going to do it. They're going to mail that document. They're going to go around your processes. And so by investing the effort in a classification scheme to say this types of data can be shared, this type of data is sensitive, by having retention policies that automatically age out your information so that you have a constantly trimmed set of information that's being shared. And then using things like Azure Information Protection to encrypt data, you retain some more control. You can go and revoke any given document if it's out in the wild, as long as it's encrypted. So these types of things, we have tooling that we'll get into in a little bit that helps users kind of automate the decision-making process about encrypting a document or allowing a document to be shared. Presenting a smaller target, so removing unredeemed guests. This is, we want as few accounts as possible with as little permission as possible. Mark talked about access reviews. Do these people still need access? Trying to keep that set of users and their access trimmed to a minimal set. And then finally, the admin does have a role. The oversight organizations do have a role in reviewing the SIM systems, reviewing the accesses, and making sure that the access reviews that should be happening are happening, and the users that they expect to be in their environment all should be there. Cloud App Security provides a way to monitor your environment for application access by external users, and ATP provides all kinds of ways to make it easier for your end users to know when they're being asked to do something that may be inappropriate, or in the case of Azure ATP, to detect unusual behaviors in your on-premises environment. So the core of this higher level construct is the security group. At Microsoft, we have two sets of groups. We have Azure AD security groups that never have guests in them. They're mastered on-prem, and any collaboration tool can be scoped to a security group. And this provides a whole universe of collaboration and access that has no external access associated with it. So you want to do something and you want to make sure that it's internals only. At Microsoft, you use Azure AD security groups. If you want to collaborate, and we do collaborate with about 200,000 external users at Microsoft, you can use Office 365 groups. They're cloud groups. There is a decision as to whether each and every one of these cloud groups can have an external user in it or not. And so that level of control is pretty granular. And there's naming policies and group expiration policies to help you rationalize and keep control over these groups that do have external users in them. So that's the fundamental governance model, or the fundamental way to separate out what resources have external access and what resources don't. So I mentioned before about encryption and guardrails. Across our tool set, we have the ability to make it very simple to understand which pieces of data will be encrypted and be able to be controlled even if they leave the environment. So through RMS templates in Exchange, you can define rules that say which messages will be encrypted automatically, taking that burden off of your end users. Certain kinds of messages to certain populations with certain content will just be encrypted by default. Or alternatively, the end user will be prompted to say, hey, do you want to encrypt this? This really seems sensitive. You should be encrypting this. Similarly, in cloud app security, your SaaS application access can be monitored, and depending on the content, depending on the application, in this case, there's a rule to encrypt content that's being uploaded to Box. Your end users are assisted in making good decisions about encrypting content that's being used in their SaaS applications. So again, the group versus individual user level, our products fully support you sharing an individual document with somebody, just like sending an attachment. Instead of sending an attachment, you can send a link. It's much better. The document gets updated when you update it. It gets removed when you remove it. It's an improvement over sending an attachment. But with our content that we have in Teams and the collaboration capabilities that we have across the suite, you can simply add someone to a workspace, to a team, where documents and conversations and wikis and everything can be shared, and thereby maybe reducing the burden on end users to say, I'm doing this kind of operation, and this kind of operation is approved for external access, and I'm going to invite the people that I want to partner with to this team. And so this gives kind of a higher level way for your end users to collaborate as well. Group owner expiration. So when you allow employees to create these groups, there's a concern about, okay, now we have a crazy amount of groups, how do we manage them? And so there is a notion of group expiration, so that the owner of the group has to continue to reattest to say, I still need this is still important, this is still valuable. Keep trimming that surface area of external collaboration to the minimum possible. So, similar to what Mark said, if you make it hard for your end users, they will just go around you. They will email that attachment and upload that document, from a different computer. So, make sure that your end users have a path to collaborate, that you have insight and visibility into, so that you can monitor it. Multiple layers of control. So, different ways. The end users have encryption. The admins have access reviews that they can monitor, and audit logs that can be checked as well. And it's a matter of education. Classification is a big component here. The more upfront work you can do to define what is normal, what's normal collaboration, what are the types of data that we have that we're willing to share versus not willing to share, can help make it easier for both your end users and your admins to keep control over the environment. So with that, best practices. So existing access rights, that's an important thing to consider. Do we need to go and reevaluate all existing access? Do we need to create new constructs or structures or workspaces, or can we use the existing ones? When we move from one to another, that's a good opportunity to, to revisit the access model. Should this have external access or not? And again, CASB, the data classification, data protection, DLP, all of our offerings can work together to give you a better controls and governance over your external users. And again, keeping that set of external access trimmed and reviewed and monitored is the key to enabling your end users to collaborate with it as efficiently as possible for your admins. So I think with that, I'll hand it over to Mark to close.
Yeah, thanks. So basically what we want to wrap up with is we've seen, looking across the customers that we've been working with at Microsoft using Azure AD, using other technologies, not just us, are these 4 themes, orchestrating, segmenting, governing, and empowering as the ways in which organizations are approaching how they would incorporate partner user access into their resources. So I think the first step is look at yourself, your organizations, which of these are most relevant for your organization. Now I know a lot of us have, I would say, a personal bias. Like I'm very much into the governance model. It's like, oh yes, I first need to lock everything down and then put it, well yes, but that's personally how I approach it. Organizationally, Microsoft approaches things a little bit differently, and hopefully that's for the better, of thinking more about, well, how do we empower the end users? Because ultimately it's the end users who are doing deals and bringing in revenue and paying for my job. So it's really how do we make them successful is the most important thing. So there's a balance here. As an IT person, you have to think, I'm the steward of organizations' data. If something goes wrong, if there's a breach, they'll come to me and say, how did you let this happen? But you just can't say, well, because I'm the steward, no one can get access. No one can read the books in the library because someone might tear a book. No, it's all about how do you make sure that you're balancing the amount that you're willing to enable the end users, what your end users are capable of doing in your organization, and then how do you make sure they understand the role of IT in this? IT is not the enemy. IT is there to help them be successful in their collaboration. For that, there's obviously a need to work with them, but not just with your own employees. One thing we've seen in the past organizations miss is reaching out to the external organizations as well. So if, let's say, you're working with, I'll just pick on Coke and Pepsi. Coke and Pepsi probably have identity management practices of their own. They probably have already thought about this. In fact, they might be hubs of their own collaboration network that could then say, well, these are the lessons learned when they went and set up collaboration with their suppliers, their dealers, and so on. So if you're working with another organization for collaboration, how do you find your counterpart over there and talk to them? Hey, sounds like our sales team and your sales team are going to work together. Let's start and establish some ground rules. How do you think about user management in your company? That's interesting. We think about user management this way in our company. That way, when something bad or potentially bad happens, you don't have to call up and say, well, who's your admin? Where did this user come from? You want to have that groundwork discussion out of the way. And again, this is no different from classic identity management. If you've been running a classic user provisioning, user lifecycle for your employees, you know that your best friend is probably someone in HR. Because they'll tell you, hey, we're going to renumber all of our departments next week. So be sure if you're using department codes to auto-provision access, you're not going to break everyone's access. Those kinds of conversations are, again, critical for external users. And it's not just the people who you're currently working with. There is a community. All of you, everyone here at the conference, probably has experiences. And there's forums out there, events like this. We've talked about other forums like the ID Pro organization, lots of conferences, user groups. How do you then find your peers in the community to discuss with them what are the best practices? We've gotten a lot of feedback from our customers, but we know that it's not the entire set. We want to then be able to work with all of you and all the different kind of identity technologies you're familiar with in order to then determine what practices work. With that, how do you then bring that to your organization? Part of the guidance we've seen for a lot of our customers that have been successful is they can then put together a playbook. This is how our organization approaches partner access. This is what the onboarding processes look like. These are the kinds of data that's in the scope of collaboration. These are the kinds of reviews, approvals, the stakeholders for each step in the journey of giving someone access or understanding how people get access. And making sure you have that playbook in place then makes it easier. The next time someone says, yes, I'd like to collaborate, or more likely, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be using Dropbox or Slack or Teams or whatever for that purpose. What should I have been doing? You have that content available for them. So I'm not going to have you read through the slide. Hopefully you'll get a copy. We have lots of documents that talk about all the things you've talked about here, the case studies, all sorts of powerful things. I didn't know that there were DLP controls in Teams until literally last week. It's like, wow, that's really exciting. And I work at Microsoft, which is, so yes, definitely take a look at these links when you get a copy of the slides. Things to do today, this afternoon. We still have some sessions coming up. So we have some sessions about collaboration coming up also after lunch today about blurring the boundaries between CIAM and IAM. Definitely worth checking that out if you're interested in partner access. And then we're also talking about, again, some of your colleagues on the customer side, how do you build architectures for applications also later today. And then there'll be a session again tomorrow morning, if you're still here, on sign-in. What are some of the libraries, the interfaces? So if you're building applications for partners to get access to, how can you build your applications in a way that the partner users can sign in, bring their own identities as well? With that, thank you very much.